4 young adults drowned inside a cave. The most disturbing part? They were only 15 feet away from the exit. There was no cave collapse, no sudden flood, no impossible rescue. Instead, an invisible danger turned a simple late-night adventure into one of Utah's most haunting cave tragedies. A danger they couldn't see, a danger they couldn't smell. And by the time they realized something was wrong, it was already too late. If you enjoy true survival stories and mysterious disasters, subscribe for more. On August 17, 2005, 5 friends in Provo, Utah went out for dinner. It was supposed to be an ordinary night, but during the evening, their conversation turned toward a hidden cave located on the side of Y Mountain. The cave wasn't marked on tourist maps. There were no signs pointing toward it. Most people living nearby had never heard of it. But among adventurous students at Brigham Young University, stories about the cave had spread. It was called Gollum's Cave, a small underground chamber hidden beneath the mountain, reachable only by passing through a narrow underwater tunnel. For some people, the description alone would have been enough to stay away. But for others, the danger was part of the attraction. And that night, the group decided to explore it. Y Mountain stands directly beside the campus of Brigham Young University, overlooking the city of Provo. From the outside, it appears completely ordinary. But beneath the mountain was a cave system that few people knew existed. The entrance was not welcoming. To reach the hidden chamber, explorers first had to travel through nearly 100 feet of low passage. The ceiling was only about 4 feet high, forcing visitors to crouch as they moved through cold, shallow water. It was uncomfortable, it was dark, and it was already a place where a mistake could become dangerous. But the real challenge came at the end of the tunnel. The entrance to the hidden chamber was a tiny opening in the cave floor. It measured only about 18 by 24 inches. To get through, explorers had to lower themselves into freezing water, hold their breath, and swim about 15 feet through a completely submerged passage. There was no room to turn around, no space to stop halfway, just a narrow tunnel leading into a hidden room inside the mountain. For experienced cavers, it was a difficult challenge. For beginners, it was a serious risk. But one person in the group believed they could handle it. Jennifer Galbraith had been inside the cave before. She knew the route, she knew about the underwater passage, and she convinced her friends that the swim was possible. However, her previous visit had not gone perfectly. During that earlier trip, Jennifer had become severely cold and even lost consciousness. It was a warning sign. But she still wanted to return. This time, she would bring friends with her: Blake Donner, Scott McDonald, Ariel Singer, and Joseph Ferguson. Joseph decided not to enter the underwater passage. Instead, he would wait outside the main cave until the others returned. It seemed like a small decision, a simple choice to sit this part out. But hours later, it would be the reason he was the only one who walked away from Gollum's Cave alive. Because the 4 people who entered that night were about to discover something far more dangerous than the freezing water, something hidden inside the cave itself. By the time the group reached Y Mountain, it was already around 2 o'clock in the morning. The world around them was quiet. The city lights of Provo were far below, and the only sound came from the water flowing through the cave entrance. For a while they sat outside the cave, talking and preparing themselves. They knew this wasn't a normal hike. They knew they were entering a place that was dark, cold, and difficult to escape. But they also believed they knew what they were doing. Jennifer had been there before. She would lead the way. Eventually, the group entered the cave. With only a single flashlight, the 4 explorers moved through the narrow entrance tunnel. The passage was exactly as intimidating as expected. They had to crouch as they followed the stream deeper underground. The walls closed in around them, and every movement sent ripples through the shallow water beneath their feet. After traveling nearly 100 feet, they reached the final obstacle, the hole leading to the hidden chamber. One by one, they prepared themselves. Jennifer went first. She lowered herself into the freezing water, took a breath, and disappeared beneath the surface. For a few seconds, there was nothing. Then the others saw movement, a ripple. Jennifer had reached the other side. The others followed. Blake Donner entered next, then Scott McDonald, then Ariel Singer. Each person made the short underwater swim through the narrow passage, and after only a few seconds underwater, they surfaced inside the hidden chamber. They had made it. The hardest part seemed to be over, but they were wrong. The chamber was small, but compared to the tunnel behind them, it probably felt enormous. The ceiling rose several feet above the water, giving them enough space to stand and move around. Above the surface was a small pocket of air. They could breathe. They could talk. They had reached the secret place they came to find. There was even a rope running through the underwater passage, attached between the entrance and the inner chamber. It was meant to help guide explorers back out. Everything suggested they would have no trouble leaving. But caves can be deceptive. Sometimes the most dangerous places are not the ones that look dangerous. The tunnel was obvious, the freezing water was obvious, the tiny entrance was obvious, but the greatest threat inside Gollum's cave was invisible: the air. Inside caves, experienced explorers use a term called bad air. It describes air that does not contain normal levels of oxygen. A healthy atmosphere contains about 21% oxygen. But in isolated caves, that balance can change. Oxygen can slowly disappear. Carbon dioxide can build up. And because caves often have very little airflow, dangerous conditions can develop without any obvious warning. There is no smell, no color, no alarm. People can feel completely normal until their ability to think clearly and react quickly has already started to disappear. Several things may have contributed to the conditions inside Gollum's cave. The chamber had almost no ventilation. Visitors breathing inside the confined space would consume oxygen and release carbon dioxide. Natural processes inside limestone caves can also create areas where gases collect. Investigators later found evidence that candles had been burned inside the cave, which could have further reduced available oxygen. The most dangerous part was that the change would likely have been gradual. The four friends probably didn't suddenly realize they were in danger. Instead, they may have slowly become more tired, more confused, more desperate for air. And when they finally decided to leave, they faced the one thing standing between them and safety: the same underwater tunnel they had just crossed. Only this time, they would have to swim through it while their bodies and minds were already beginning to fail. But based on the evidence found afterward, investigators believe the group likely understood that something was wrong and decided to return to the surface. The problem was that getting out was much harder than getting in. The passage was narrow. There was only room for one person at a time. And once someone entered the water, there was almost no way to turn around or pass another person. Jennifer went first. She was the most experienced member of the group, so it made sense that she would lead the way out. But somewhere in those few seconds underwater, something went wrong. Jennifer never made it out. Her body was later found floating just inside the underwater passage. Inside the chamber, the remaining three friends had no way of knowing what had happened. They were waiting in the darkness. Eventually, Ariel Singer followed. But investigators believe she may have encountered Jennifer inside the narrow passage. The tunnel was too small to move around another person. There was nowhere to go. Then, Blake Donner entered. By this point, the situation had become almost impossible. The air inside the chamber was continuing to deteriorate, and panic was likely increasing. Scott McDonald was the last person remaining inside the hidden chamber. He had spent the longest time breathing the poor quality air. When he finally attempted to escape, he faced the same obstacle as the others. When rescuers later recovered the bodies, all four victims were found facing toward the exit. They had been trying to get out. They just couldn't make it the final few feet. Outside the cave, Joseph Ferguson was still waiting. At first, he had no reason to believe anything was wrong. He didn't know exactly how long his friends planned to stay inside. But eventually, the waiting became concerning. Nearly an hour passed. There was no flashlight, no movement, no voices. Joseph contacted people familiar with the cave. When nobody could explain what happened, he called authorities. Emergency crews arrived and immediately faced a difficult rescue. Before anyone could safely enter the inner chamber, rescuers had to improve the conditions inside the cave. They pumped fresh air into the chamber. They removed water from the tunnel to create more space for rescuers. Eventually, they reached the hidden room, but there was nothing they could do. All four friends were gone. The official cause of death was drowning, but the question remained: how could four healthy young adults drown inside a tunnel only 15 feet long? After the tragedy, authorities made the decision to permanently seal the entrance to Gollum's cave. Concrete was poured into the opening, preventing future explorers from entering the same deadly passage. The cave that once represented adventure became a warning, a reminder that underground environments can hide dangers far beyond what the eye can see. The most haunting part of the Gollum Cave tragedy is not how deep the cave was. It wasn't hundreds of feet underground. It wasn't a massive underground system. The distance between the victims and safety was only about 15 feet. But sometimes the greatest dangers are the ones we never realize are there.